I'm Janice, 72 years old. While recovering from surgery under my son's roof, his wife, Portia, committed an unthinkable violation. She drugged me, then shaved my head, her cruel laughter echoing as she called me cleaner. She thought her malice, like her spiraling addictions, would remain her secret. She never imagined I would be the one to meticulously unmask her and orchestrate her spectacular ruin. Before I begin my story, I just want to say thank you for listening to me pour my heart out. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. It helps me more than you know. Now let me tell you what really happened. The sterile scent of antiseptic still clung to my clothes, a stubborn reminder of the hospital stay I'd just endured. 72 years old, and for the first time since my beloved David passed 15 years ago, I felt truly vulnerable. A knee replacement, minor surgery, as the young doctor had cheerfully called it, had left me with a constellation of aches, a landscape of purple bruises, and a humbling reliance on a walker that felt more like a cage. Michael, my son, bless his heart, had insisted I recuperate at his home. "You can't manage those stairs on your own, Mom," he'd said, his brow furrowed with a genuine concern that warmed me. "Portia and I will take good care of you." Portia, my daughter-in-law. Even in my pain-fogged state, the thought of an extended stay under her roof sent a small shiver of apprehension down my spine. 41, impeccably stylish, and with an opinion as sharp and unyielding as the crease in her expensive trousers, Portia Monroe Washington had always kept me at a polite, if somewhat chilly, arm's length. She ran Michael's household with an iron will and a flawless manicure, and I often felt like a slightly embarrassing old-fashioned relic she tolerated for her husband's sake. Michael, my dear Michael, now 43 and perpetually stressed by his demanding job in corporate law, tried his best to bridge the gap. "Portia's just particular, Mom," he'd say with a weary sigh after one of her subtly barbed comments about my clutter or my old-fashioned ways. "She means well." I wasn't always so sure about that, but for Michael's sake, for the sake of peace, I'd always plastered on a smile and chosen my words carefully. Now I was to be a guest, an invalid guest in her domain. The first few days were a careful dance of strained politeness. Michael was wonderful when he was home, fluffing my pillows, bringing me tea, his face etched with a loving concern that reminded me so much of his father. But he worked long hours, leaving me in Portia's less than tender care for most of the day. Her resentment was a palpable thing, a low hum beneath the surface of her brittle smiles and overly solicitous inquiries about my comfort. "Are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable in a reclining chair, Janice?" she'd ask, her eyes flicking towards the antique wingback I preferred, a chair David and I had bought together. "That old thing looks like it might collapse." Her moods were like a weather vane in a hurricane. One moment all brisk efficiency, the next, a brooding silence punctuated by sharp sighs if I asked for something. I noticed her hands trembled sometimes as she poured my water. Her eyes often had a strained, restless quality, and she'd frequently disappear for long stretches, her phone pressed to her ear in hushed, urgent conversations that would end abruptly if I entered the room. When I once asked Michael if Portia was feeling all right, mentioning her agitation, he just ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "She's got a lot on her plate, Mom. A charity auction she's organizing. Just try not to worry her, okay?" So I tried. I stayed in the guest room, which she'd decorated in shades of sterile beige that felt more like a hotel than a home. I read, I knitted, I watched the days blur into a monotonous cycle of pain medication and daytime television. But the unease grew. There was a frantic energy about Portia, a brittleness that seemed to crackle beneath her polished veneer. I'd see her flinch if Michael questioned an extravagant new purchase that arrived by courier, or her sharp defensive tone if he asked about the household accounts. Once I overheard her on the phone, her voice low and venomous. "Don't tell me about deadlines. I need more time or it all falls apart." When she saw me in the hallway, her face went pale, then hardened into a glare before she quickly composed herself into a mask of indifference. I tried to speak to Michael again. "Son," I said one evening when he was helping me with my leg exercises, "I'm worried about Portia. She seems overwrought, and I think she might be spending a great deal of money. Are things all right?" He avoided my gaze, his attention fixed on my knee. "Mom, Portia handles our finances. She's very capable. She's just under pressure with this big charity event. Please don't add to her stress by questioning her." She gets very sensitive. He patted my leg a little too firmly. Just focus on getting better, okay? Let us worry about the rest. His words, meant to reassure, only amplified my sense of being an outsider, a burden whose concerns were to be dismissed. It was the us that stung. Let us worry. When had my son, who used to share every childhood fear and triumph with me, become part of a us that so clearly excluded his own mother? The atmosphere in the house grew heavier, charged with unspoken tensions. Portia's moments of thinly veiled hostility became more frequent. She'd forget to bring my lunch tray or accidentally leave my pain medication just out of reach. Small cruelties, perhaps, but they chipped away at my spirit, making me feel increasingly isolated and unwelcome. I longed for the peace of my own home, the comfort of my own things, the memory of David's gentle presence. My recovery was progressing, but my heart felt heavier each day. Something was deeply wrong in this house, a darkness coiling around Portia, and Michael, my loving but conflict-avoidant son, seemed either unwilling or unable to see it. And I, his recuperating mother, was caught in the middle, a reluctant witness to a brewing storm I had no power to escape. It was a Tuesday evening, I remember, just over a week into my stay. My knee throbbed with a vengeance, a relentless, fiery ache that made every movement an agony. I'd been trying to be brave, to minimize my discomfort for Michael's sake, but the pain was wearing me down, leaving me frayed and tearful. Michael was working late as usual, another crisis at the office. Portia had been particularly on edge all day, her movements jerky, her responses clipped. She'd flitted in and out of my room, her eyes unnaturally bright, a strange, tight smile plastered on her face that didn't reach them. Around 9, she appeared with my usual pain medication and a glass of water. "You look absolutely dreadful, Janice," she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "Exhausted. I think you need a really good deep sleep tonight. I'm giving you an extra one of these a little early. Dr. Henderson said it was fine if the pain was bad." I hesitated. Dr. Henderson hadn't mentioned an extra dose to me, but the pain was bad, and the thought of a long, uninterrupted sleep was incredibly tempting. Portia was already holding out the pill, her smile unwavering. Perhaps she was trying to be kind in her own brusque way. "All right, dear," I murmured, taking the medication. "Thank you. I am very tired." She watched me swallow it, that strange, bright intensity in her eyes making me vaguely uneasy. "Good," she said almost too quickly. "You just rest now." Deeply. The medication hit me harder and faster than usual. A thick, cloying lethargy crept through my limbs, my eyelids growing impossibly heavy. The edges of the room blurred, Portia's face swam in and out of focus, and then there was just darkness. A heavy, dreamless void. I surfaced hours later, or perhaps it was the next morning, I couldn't tell. My head felt thick, my mouth like cotton. But it was another sensation, an unfamiliar one, that truly jolted me from the dregs of sleep. A coldness. A draft. On my scalp. I reached up a tentative hand, my fingers brushing against not the soft, familiar cloud of my silver hair, but something short, bristly, stubble. My eyes flew open. The room was dim, the early morning light filtering weakly through the curtains. I fumbled for the lamp, my heart beginning to pound a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. The light flickered on. I raised my trembling hands to my head again, exploring, disbelieving. My hair, my beautiful silver hair that I'd always taken such quiet pride in, the hair David had loved to stroke. It was gone. Sheared off. Not just cut, but hacked away, leaving a rough, uneven stubble that felt alien and brutal against my fingertips. A strangled sob escaped me. I scrambled out of bed, my walker clattering as I lurched towards the dressing table mirror. The reflection that stared back was a grotesque caricature. A stranger with a violated scalp, eyes wide with dawning horror and utter incomprehension. Patches of my silver hair lay scattered on the floor around the bed, like fallen snow after a storm. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking. "No, no, no." The door creaked open and Portia stood there, already dressed in a sharp pantsuit, a coffee cup in her hand. She took in my reflection, my horrified face, the evidence on the floor, and a slow, chilling smirk spread across her lips. "Oh, you're awake," she cooed, her voice dripping with a mock solicitude that made my skin crawl. She sauntered into the room, her gaze clinical as she surveyed my head. "Doesn't that feel so much cleaner, Janice?" Much less fuss for everyone, especially with you being so unwell. She let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound as brittle and cruel as breaking glass. Honestly, it's an improvement. All that old lady hair was a bit depressing, wasn't it? The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated malice of it stole my breath. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misguided attempt at care. This was a deliberate act of cruelty, of humiliation. Michael! I finally found my voice, a raw, broken shriek. Michael, come here. Now. My son stumbled into the room a moment later, his hair disheveled, his eyes bleary with sleep, taking in the scene. Me, clutching my ravaged head, the scattered locks of hair, Portia's triumphant smirk. His face went slack with shock, his eyes widening in disbelief. Mom? What on earth happened? She did this. I cried, pointing a trembling finger at Portia. Your wife. She shaved my head while I was asleep. Michael stared from me to Portia, then back to the hair on the floor, his expression a maelstrom of confusion and dawning horror. Portia? Did you? Portia immediately launched her offensive, her voice rising, sharp and accusatory. Michael, darling, don't be ridiculous. Of course I didn't shave her head. She was terribly restless last night, feverish, pulling at her hair. It was getting so matted and unhygienic. I was worried about infection after her surgery. I tidied it up. Drastically, yes, because it was such a mess. I was trying to help her. She's clearly confused this morning, probably still groggy from her medication. She turned to me, her eyes like chips of ice. You were pulling out clumps, Janice. Don't you remember? I stared at her, aghast at the brazenness of her lies. That's not true. You drugged me. You did this to humiliate me. Drugged you? Portia scoffed, turning back to Michael with an expression of wounded innocence. See, Michael? She's not making any sense. She's overwrought. I think the surgery and the medication have just been too much for her. Michael looked from Portia's furious, indignant face to my tear-streaked, devastated one, his own expression lost and overwhelmed. Portia, her hair, all of it. He stammered, clearly struggling. Mom, are you sure? Of course I'm sure. I sobbed. Look at me, Michael. Look what she did. I was just trying to keep things clean and manageable for her. Portia insisted, her voice rising to a shriek. She's making me out to be a monster. You believe me, don't you, Michael? You know I wouldn't hurt her. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze darting between us, a man caught in a vice. I don't know what to think, he finally mumbled, his eyes avoiding mine. Portia, maybe you should have waited, asked me. Mom, maybe you were just very out of it. He sounded desperate to find a middle ground, a less horrifying explanation. But there was no middle ground. There was only Portia's vicious act and my son's devastating failure to unequivocally condemn it, to protect me. His weakness, his willingness to entertain even for a moment Portia's outrageous lies, felt like a second violation. In that moment, with my scalp cold and exposed, my dignity in tatters, and my son looking everywhere but at the truth of his wife's cruelty, I had never felt so utterly alone, so profoundly betrayed. The nightmare wasn't just what Portia had done. It was the chilling realization that in my own son's home, I was utterly unprotected. The days that immediately followed the shearing of my hair were a living torment, each one a fresh landscape of humiliation and a deeper, more aching betrayal. My scalp, exposed and tender, felt constantly chilled, a physical reminder of Portia's barbarity. Every time I accidentally caught my reflection, in the darkened screen of the television, the bathroom mirror I now dreaded, even the polished surface of a spoon, a jolt of shame and fury would course through me. This violated creature with the brutalized stubble, the haunted eyes, this wasn't me. It was a caricature, a victim sculpted by my daughter-in-law's malice. Michael, my son, was a study in conflicted misery. He'd hover at my doorway, his face etched with a guilt he couldn't quite voice, offering me cups of tea I didn't want and platitudes that felt like salt in my wounds. Mom, Portia, she gets a bit carried away sometimes, he'd stammer, avoiding my gaze. She says she was really just trying to help, that you were quite distressed with your hair. Distressed. I cut him off, my voice a low, dangerous tremor. Michael, she drugged me. She waited until I was unconscious and then she took scissors or clippers to my head. Does that sound like help to you? He would flinch, running a hand through his hair. Portia swears you were pulling at it, Mom. That you had a slight fever. She panicked. She says the extra medication was just to ensure you rested through your discomfort. He was parroting her lies, I knew it. Whether he fully believed them or simply chose to for the sake of a quieter life, the effect was the same. My truth was dismissed, my violation minimized. He couldn't or wouldn't see the venomous viper he was married to. Portia herself was a chilling spectacle of feigned concern and smug triumph. She'd bring me my meals with an overly solicitous air, asking in that honey-sweet voice if dear Janice was feeling more herself today. Her eyes, however, would glint with a cold amusement as they flicked over my shorn head. She had marked me, branded me with her cruelty, and she was reveling in her power. The gaslighting was relentless. Any mention I made of the assault was met with wide-eyed denial or suggestions that my memory was playing tricks on me due to the surgery and medication. We really must talk to Dr. Henderson about your medication levels, Gloria, she'd said to Michael in my hearing, loud enough for her false concern to land like a lead weight. My physical recovery from the knee surgery tethered me to that house, a gilded cage where my tormentor held the keys. For another week, perhaps 10 days, I was genuinely limited in my mobility. Each step with the walker was an effort, each attempt to navigate the stairs a trial. This forced proximity to Portia, this inability to simply walk out and reclaim my own space, my own sanity, was a unique form of torture. But it was also, I began to realize, an opportunity. The initial storm of grief and rage began to subside, not into acceptance but into something colder, harder, more focused. If Michael wouldn't see, if he couldn't break free from Portia's manipulative grip, then I would have to find a way to show him, to show everyone, the unvarnished truth. My word against hers was clearly not enough. I needed proof, irrefutable proof of her instability, her deceit, the darkness that lurked beneath her polished facade. It was during one of Portia's increasingly frequent errands. She was always dashing out now, her explanations vague, her demeanor agitated upon her return, that the idea began to form. I'd been watching her more closely, my senses sharpened by my ordeal. Her hushed, frantic phone calls, the way she'd jump if Michael entered the room unexpectedly, the almost compulsive way she'd check her phone for messages. Something was driving her, something beyond mere resentment of me. If I could just capture some of that. But how? I was hardly a spy. The thought of technology beyond my old reliable television remote and the phone I used for calls and texts was daunting. Yet the image of Portia's smug laughing face as she taunted me about my cleaner head burned in my memory, a relentless spur. This couldn't stand. One afternoon when Michael was home, looking particularly weary and guilt-ridden after another tense exchange with Portia about some unexplained credit card charge, I saw my opening. I feigned a particularly bad spell of forgetfulness, asking him the same question about his workday 3 times in a row. "Oh, Michael dear," I sighed, pressing my fingers to my temples. "My mind is just like sieve these days. Dr. Henderson said it's the medication, but I do worry. I can't seem to remember a thing he tells me after my appointments." I looked up at him, my eyes wide with a carefully crafted vulnerability. I was thinking, perhaps one of those little recording machines? The kind students use for lectures? So I could just play back what the doctor says. Or maybe even, I added as if the thought had just struck me, record some of my old family stories for you and Kayla before I forget them all. Michael looked at me, a mixture of pity and relief flooding his face. This he could handle. A confused, forgetful mother wanting a harmless gadget was far easier to manage than a mother accusing his wife of a barbaric assault. That's actually a good idea, Mom," he said, latching onto it. "Yes, a little voice recorder. Simple. I can order one for you online. We'll get you one that's easy to use." He was so relieved by my seemingly harmless request, by this evidence of my failing faculties that so neatly fit Portia's narrative, that he had it delivered within 2 days. It was small, black, and discreet, with a single prominent button for record. The instruction manual was thin. That night, after Portia and Michael had retired to their room, their hushed, tense argument a familiar soundtrack to my evenings, I sat alone in the dim light of my guest room. The small recorder felt cool and heavy in my palm. I, Janice Washington, a 72-year-old widow who had faced down life's storms with resilience and grace, was now contemplating espionage in my own son's home. A bitter smile touched my lips. Portia wanted to see me as frail, forgetful, and powerless. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. I spent the next few hours fueled by a cold fury and the memory of Robert's unshakable belief in my strength, painstakingly learning its simple operation. My plan, audacious and terrifying, began to solidify. I would gather my proof. I would unmask Portia Monroe. And then I would have my justice. The woman my son and daughter-in-law thought they were dealing with over the next few weeks was a shadow of my former self, a creature of hesitant steps, clouded memory, and eyes that often seemed to stare into a bewildered distance. I perfected the art of the misplaced teacup, the quavering voice asking for a thrice-repeated explanation, the vacant nod when Portia issued sharp, impatient instructions. It was a humiliating charade, each feigned moment of confusion a small, bitter pill to swallow. But beneath this carefully constructed veneer of decline, a different Janice was at work. A meticulous observer, a patient strategist fueled by a cold, unyielding anger and an unshakable resolve. My little voice recorder, nestled in the pocket of my dressing gown or hidden beneath a cushion on my armchair, became an extension of my own outraged senses. Portia, meanwhile, was unraveling. Her addiction, or addictions as I was beginning to suspect, was a hungry beast, and its appetite was making her increasingly brazen and astonishingly careless. The polished composure she usually wore like expensive armor began to crack, revealing the frantic, desperate woman beneath. Her errands became more frequent, her absences longer. She'd return with flushed cheeks and overly bright eyes, or sometimes pale and trembling, snapping at Michael over the smallest perceived slight. He, bless his deluded heart, still tried to attribute it to stress from her charity work, but even his denial was wearing thin around the edges. My first real piece of ammunition came from an overheard phone call. Portia often took her calls in the conservatory, believing herself to be out of earshot. I had taken to resting on the chaise lounge in the adjoining sunroom, feigning sleep, my small recorder tucked into the depths of a large knitting bag beside me. One afternoon, her voice, usually so controlled when she spoke to outsiders, was sharp with a desperate edge. "Look, Lorenzo," she hissed into her phone, "I told you I'd have it by Friday. Yes, the whole amount. Just give me until then. My mother-in-law's situation has complicated things." Pause. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. She barely knows what day it is. Lorenzo, complicated things? And I barely knew what day it was, did I? The recording was crystal clear, her contempt for me, her financial desperation, all laid bare. The pills were next. Portia had always been particular about her vitamins and supplements. Now I began to notice a furtiveness about them. One morning, after she'd rushed out in a flurry, forgetting her oversized designer handbag, I found it slightly agape on the hall table. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like a terrible violation, but I had to know. My hands trembled as I reached inside, my fingers closing around not one, but 3 different prescription bottles, none of them with Portia's name on them. One was for strong painkillers, another for anxiety, a third I didn't recognize. I pulled out my old smartphone, the one they thought I barely knew how to use for calls, and quickly, clumsily photographed the labels, the pharmacy details before carefully placing them back. Later, a discreet online search confirmed my suspicions. A dangerous cocktail, especially if misused. Her laptop became another source. She'd always been glued to it, but now she'd sometimes leave it open on the sofa when she rushed off to answer the door or take another hushed call. Feigning a nap, I'd wait until the coast was clear, then with movements far steadier than my usual frail act would suggest, I'd approach it. My tech skills were rudimentary, but Robert had taught me the basics years ago, and I'd always been a quick study when I needed to be. I didn't need to hack anything. Her carelessness was my key. Betting slips from online casinos, a horrifyingly long list of transactions to sites I didn't recognize, threatening emails from creditors demanding immediate payment, and a browser history filled with searches for quick loans and how to hide debt from spouse. My old smartphone's camera roll began to fill with damning screenshots. Each click of the camera was a small nail in Portia's coffin. Arguments between Michael and Portia became more frequent, their hushed, angry voices seeping through the thin walls of my guest room at night. My recorder, placed strategically on my nightstand, captured it all. Portia's tearful manipulations, her furious denials when Michael tentatively questioned a bill, her contemptuous references to me as your senile mother or the old bat. Michael, my poor bewildered Michael. I heard his confusion, his frustration, his weak attempts to assert himself, always overwhelmed by Portia's emotional onslaughts. He was trapped, I realized, almost as much as I had been in that attic. The evidence mounted. Photographs, audio clips, my own handwritten notes detailing dates, times, overheard conversations. Each piece was a fresh stab of pain, a confirmation of the rotten core of my son's marriage, of the danger Portia represented. There were days the sheer weight of it all, the ugliness I was unearthing, threatened to overwhelm me. The desire to just scream, to confront them, to escape that house was immense. But I held on to my resolve, a lifeline in the turbulent sea of their deceit. My feigned confusion became my shield, my perceived weakness my greatest strength. They saw a frail old woman, slowly succumbing to age and infirmity. They had no idea they were living with a meticulous detective, patiently gathering the threads that would soon weave their inescapable undoing. The family reunion was approaching, the traditional gathering I always hosted. This year, I thought with a grim satisfaction, the main event would be a truth they could no longer deny. After nearly 3 weeks of playing the part of the dazed, fragile invalid, my collection of evidence against Portia was substantial and sickening. The little voice recorder held hours of her sharp-tongued remarks, her frantic, debt-laden phone calls, and her explosive, irrational arguments with Michael overheard through the thin walls. My old smartphone, a tool I'd once used mainly for sharing pictures of my roses and Robert's old workshop, now held a gallery of damning images. Hastily snapped photos of hidden pill bottles with names that weren't hers, screenshots of ominous messages from online gambling sites on her carelessly left open laptop, and pictures of overdue credit card statements for extravagant purchases I knew Michael hadn't authorized. Each piece of proof was a testament to her deceit, a stone in the foundation of the justice I intended to build. I knew I couldn't keep up my charade much longer. The strain was immense. The moment to act had to be chosen carefully. It came on a Thursday afternoon. Portia, after a particularly tense and whispered phone call that left her pale and jittery, announced she had an urgent appointment with her charity committee liaison, and flounced out of the house, the slam of the front door echoing her agitation. Michael had come home early from work, complaining of a migraine, looking worn and stressed. This was it. I found him in the kitchen, nursing a glass of water, his shoulders slumped. "Michael, dear," I began, my voice soft, still tinged with the feigned weakness he'd grown accustomed to. "Could we talk for a moment? There's something I need to show you. Something that's been troubling me deeply." He looked up, his eyes wary. "Mom, if this is about Portia again, I'm really not up for it. She's just under a lot of pressure." "I know you think that, son," I said, pulling out the small, discreet folder where I'd compiled the worst of my findings. "But I need you to look at this. For your own sake as much as mine." Reluctantly, he took the folder. I watched his face as he began to leaf through the printouts of the credit card statements, his brow furrowing. Then came the photos of the pill bottles, the gambling site screenshots. His hand stilled. I then took out my small recorder and played a short, chilling clip of Portia on the phone, her voice a venomous hiss as she argued with someone named Lorenzo about owing him big, and how she'd get the money one way or another. Then another clip, one of her screaming at Michael during a late-night argument that he was too stupid to see how much pressure she was under, and that his mother was making everything worse. The color drained from Michael's face. The weary resignation I'd seen so often was replaced by a dawning horror, then a raw, almost boyish pain. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a bewildered anguish. "Mom, I had no idea. Pills? Gambling? This much debt." His voice was a hoarse whisper. The carefully constructed wall of his denial, the one Portia had so skillfully maintained and he had so willingly hidden behind, was crumbling before my eyes. "She's an addict, Michael," I said gently but firmly. "And her addiction, her desperation, is what fueled her cruelty to me. It's what's been tearing your life apart, even if you haven't wanted to see it." I told him then briefly about Portia giving me the extra medication, the detail I'd withheld until he was ready to hear the full scope of her issues. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I've been such a fool," he choked out. "So blind. Mom, what she did to you, your hair. I should have." "What matters now, Michael?" I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my own heart, is what we do about it. She needs help. But she also needs to be held accountable. And you need to be safe financially and emotionally. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but now holding a new, unfamiliar resolve. You're right, Mom. You're right. This has to stop. We have to confront her. Confronting Portia alone when she's like this. I began, choosing my words carefully. Might not be productive. She's very good at twisting things, as you know. Perhaps if her parents were here? Or maybe Aunt Carol and Uncle James. Someone she respects, or at least, someone whose opinion might make her pause. We could say we're concerned about her recent stress levels and want to have a calm family discussion. Michael seized on the idea, perhaps needing the buffer of other adults as much as I did. His Aunt Carol, my sister-in-law, was a formidable woman, and Portia, for all her bluster, was slightly intimidated by her. He made the calls, his voice strained but determined, inviting Carol and James over for an urgent family matter concerning Portia that very evening, emphasizing the need for a calm, supportive approach to discuss her obvious distress. The hours leading up to Portia's return were thick with a nervous anticipation. Carol and James arrived, their faces etched with concern after Michael's brief, guarded explanation. We sat in the living room, the folder of evidence on the coffee table. I felt a strange calm settle over me. My part in the investigation was done. Now it was up to Michael and to Portia herself. Portia swept in just after 7, laden with shopping bags from expensive boutiques. More evidence of her compulsive spending. She stopped short upon seeing Carol and James, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Well, what's this? She asked, her voice sharp. A surprise party? It's not my birthday. Michael stood up, his face pale but resolute. Portia, we need to talk. We're worried about you. He gestured towards the folder. Mom has found some things that explain a lot about your behavior lately. Portia's gaze shot to me, pure venom in her eyes, then back to the folder. Her carefully constructed composure began to crack. What things? She demanded, her voice rising. What nonsense has your mother been filling your head with now? More of her senile delusions. It's not delusions, Portia, Michael said, his voice gaining strength as Carol and James watched gravely. He opened the folder, showing her a printout of a gambling debt. This isn't stress. This is something much more serious. As Michael laid out the evidence, piece by piece, the pills, the debts, the frantic calls, Portia's denials became more shrill, more desperate. She accused me of planting things, of forging documents, of trying to destroy her marriage. She screamed that we were all ganging up on her. The elegant facade shattered, revealing the raw, raging desperation of a cornered addict. It was an ugly, explosive tirade filled with blame, self-pity, and not an ounce of remorse. And this time Michael didn't back down. He just stood there, letting her words, her own self-incriminating fury, hang heavy in the air, damning her more completely than any accusation I could have ever leveled. Her ruin, I realized, was now fully in her own hands. Portia's explosive tirade eventually burned itself out, leaving her a trembling, disheveled wreck amidst the stunned silence of our small family gathering. The mask of the sophisticated, controlled woman was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of her addiction and desperation. Aunt Carol, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak, her voice firm but not unkind. Portia, she said gently, it's clear you need serious help, child. This isn't just about stress anymore. Uncle James, his expression grim, nodded in agreement, his gaze fixed on Michael. It was Michael who finally, definitively took charge. The man who had seemed so cowed, so easily manipulated by Portia for years, now stood straighter, his voice imbued with a pained but resolute authority I hadn't heard from him since before his father died. The irrefutable evidence I'd presented, followed by Portia's self-incriminating meltdown, had acted like a brutal but necessary surgery on his denial. Portia, he said, his voice hoarse but steady, Carol is right. You need professional help for your addictions, the gambling, the pills, all of it. Immediately. I'll find a facility. And until you are well and until we can sort out this catastrophic financial mess you've created, I think it's best we separate. We can't live like this anymore. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a profound, aching apology that needed no words. And Mom deserves to live in peace and safety. Portia, A broken doll now, offered no further resistance, only a series of shuddering sobs. Her parents, whom Carol had discreetly called during a lull in Portia's outburst, arrived shortly thereafter, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning shame as Michael quietly, grimly, laid out the situation. They took her with them that night, a temporary measure while arrangements for a rehabilitation facility were made. The downfall was swift and brutal, just as her attack on me had been. Word of Portia's addictions and the extent of her deceit, including the head-shaving incident which Michael now recounted with shame to key family members, spread through their social circle like wildfire. Her carefully curated image shattered. Invitations dried up, friends distanced themselves, and her beloved charity committees quietly accepted her resignation. The financial repercussions were equally dire. The debts she had accrued were staggering, and Michael, with legal counsel, began the painful process of disentangling their finances, initiating divorce proceedings as Portia reluctantly entered a long-term treatment program. Her life, as she knew it, was indeed ruined, a direct consequence of the secrets she'd harbored and the cruelty she'd inflicted. As soon as my knee permitted, just a week after that explosive evening, I moved back to my own dear home. Walking through my own front door, breathing in the familiar scent of beeswax and old roses, was like taking the first deep, clean breath after nearly drowning. The house felt like a sanctuary again, a haven. Michael, his face etched with a humility and sorrow I hadn't seen in him for years, helped me move, his every action a quiet apology. He supervised the changing of the locks, the installation of a better security system, small gestures, but they spoke volumes. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet healing. My silver hair, my badge of honor now, began to sprout in soft, determined tufts, a visible symbol of renewal. Friends and family rallied, their visits no longer strained by Portia's oppressive presence but filled with genuine warmth and support. Aunt Carol brought over casseroles. Uncle James fixed the leaky faucet Andre had always been too busy to attend to. Mrs. Henderson from across the street came for tea, and we talked for hours, really talked for the first time in ages. Michael was a constant, tentative presence. He called every day. He visited not out of duty but seemingly out of a deep, painful need to reconnect, to make amends. He sat in my kitchen, his expensive suit looking out of place, and listened, truly listened, as I spoke of my pain, my fear during those days, the depth of his earlier failure to protect me. There were no excuses from him now, only a raw, honest grief for his own blindness and the hurt he had allowed. "I will never forgive myself for not seeing it, Mom," he said one afternoon, his voice thick with emotion. "For not protecting you. I was a coward. I was weak. And you paid the price for it." "We both did, Michael," I said softly. Forgiveness, I knew, would be a journey, not an instant absolution. Trust, once so brutally broken, would need to be rebuilt with painstaking care, one honest conversation, one thoughtful action at a time. But for the first time I saw a path forward for him, for us. He was finally facing the truth, not just about Portia but about himself. My life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The anger, the cold fury that had driven my investigation, began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet strength, a profound sense of my own resilience. I had faced down a vicious betrayal, not with matching cruelty, but with intelligence, patience, and an unwavering belief in the truth. I had reclaimed my dignity, my home, my peace of mind. Portia's ruin was her own making. My triumph was in my survival, my spirit uncrushed. Each morning now, I faced my reflection not with shame, but with a quiet understanding. My head, still nearly bare, the first soft silver wisps of regrowth just beginning to haze the surface like frost on a winter morning, was no longer a symbol of Portia's violation. Instead, it was a testament to my endurance, the stark, unadorned truth of a battle I had fought and won. The scars they'd left were real, etched in memory, but they were no longer chains. I was Janice Washington, a woman who had walked through fire and refused to be consumed. My home was mine. My peace was mine. And as I looked at the strong woman staring back, her eyes clear and steady, I often thought to myself, they tried to bury my spirit beneath an avalanche of cruelty, but they forgot one crucial thing. Some seeds only sprout in the deepest darkness, growing towards a light they make for themselves.